All right, thank you for coming back together and for engaging with one another so quickly. We're interested in some of what you talked about, though. So again, in what ways does this look like or not look like what's going on in your own context, in your own schools around that? So we'd like to hear some of what came up in your conversation. Yeah, Becky.
12-year school, second year school. A lot of same issues about building agency within kids and teachers.
Great point. So first of all, let me explain this thing. One of the things we've had to get more and more conscious about as we've grown as a network is how do people that don't have the luxury and privilege of getting here, whether it's for weather or budget or whatever, access the experiences and the learning that happens at events like this. And so this room, as well as some of the rooms you'll probably visit this afternoon, are being recorded for that purpose. It'll mean a couple of annoying things for you. It'll mean that, one, I'm going to repeat a lot of things that you guys say so that they get captured for the video. And two, it'll mean that Starla and I will be passing this microphone back and forth all morning. If you can live with that, we're good. The comment was, we've got two schools here, very different places in their implementation and how long they've been doing this. And the themes aren't actually very different across the two. And Rick and I were just talking about this a minute ago. As we were preparing for this, we actually asked that very specific question. We said, do we have anything to suggest that these themes are different if we take into account the variable of how many years you've been implementing? And we just didn't have anything to suggest it was very different across years of implementation.
So that's interesting, because at Da Vinci, high school's in going in the 10th year, junior high in the 5th.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have learned about collaboration, critical thinking, all of our other ESLers is, if you assess it, it's not really fair unless you explicitly identify where you're teaching it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did that for a lot of time. We were assessing collaboration, assuming that those team builders that we did at the beginning of the school year was our instruction.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing. So we actually have refused to make agency one of our ESLers until we can all pinky swear 7th through 12th grade every single instructor that we have the same definition and that we're going to teach it and assess it in a sequenced way.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of conversation and piloting of it in individual classrooms, but I can tell you that until we can say this is what it means to students, parents, and each other, we're not interested in assessing just yet, because we want to do it. I feel like we have one chance to do it right.
Right.
Instead of 17 fresh starts. Doesn't sound right to me. So that's kind of
Fascinating. Fascinating. Other comments and themes that came up? Yeah. Who's up here? Yeah.
We talked about at our school, at the first year that we started, we had no choice but to develop agency for our kids. We knew that in order for them to learn and to trust us, that we had to have meaningful conversations with them about their behavior, about our behavior. We had to own what we thought was important. We had to acknowledge them in the conversation as we go along, and slowly, it was a lot of tears. I went home several nights and cried because it was tough at the beginning, but developing agency and having the kids learn to trust us. We're in our second year of implementation now, and it's a huge difference. They want to learn. They come to the plate with a whole different purpose. They understand what learning means. They know that if we're going to teach something to them, that we have a purpose for doing it. We give them the purpose, we let them know this is what we're doing. This is the part of the project we're working on, and this is what we're going to do today. They listen to that and they respond to that. So it's made a whole, the atmosphere of trust has made a whole huge difference in terms of what we are able to do in their thinking and how they respond. It's been amazing.
So a couple things there. One, right, a connection to some other elements of the culture, specifically trust, right, is really having a big impact on the work you did around trying to build agency. And kind of, it's a steep hill to climb, but there's a moment when things kind of started to click in and you started to see really some dividends coming from that early work. Great. I'm curious about the second one, which is about more attention to sort of explicit instruction than to the environment as a whole. What conversation did you have around that, if any? Pat?
One of the things that we talked about were new teachers versus veteran teachers, and that sometimes your newer teachers want to spend too much time talking, and sometimes it's your older teachers who want to spend too much time talking.
Right. Well, and one of the points I hear Pat sort of bring to the surface for us, right, is your kids experience the school as a whole, not just all the separate classrooms, right? So the extent to which all those different classrooms are aligned or are misaligned with one another can have a big impact on whether or not you're being successful at trying to build something like agency. So, I thought I saw one more hand go up, and then we're going to move us forward. I'm going to hand this to Starla very quickly.
Oh, sorry. I can usually use my teacher voice, but I guess I need the microphone. So I really want to go back to your point around your students are really learning how to be thinkers and really opening up in the classrooms, and you're seeing they want to be there. There is a purpose. And I think that is a great segue into us digging deeper into the text that we're about to think through. Previously, you were sent an email about some pre-reading prior to the Leadership Summit, but that's okay if you didn't have a chance because we know that you are busy directors. I want you all to go into the actual ECHO briefcase. And we want to give you some time to reconnect with the text. And in the ECHO briefcase, you should see teaching adolescents to become learners. It's the literature about that. Anyone willing to share out anything that came up from them after reading this text? Any questions, any thoughts that are coming up for you after reading this text? Yes, sir.
In reading the multiple intelligence theory and how that's built into what students, what their assets are bringing to the table, my thought was, in our team builders, we really focus on culture and feeling comfortable. My question to myself is, how do we figure in those academic mindsets into culture so that kids feel comfortable hanging out with one another and doing projects, but also they're feeling strong in what they bring to the table with their own minds, and they know that they can do it, and ways to kind of incorporate the culture with the academic mindset piece. It's very interesting to me.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
I was thinking similar to him that first point of do you belong in the academic community. There was a blog posting recently on this idea of Hart's ladder of participation, going from whether you're just manipulating and tokenism of the student's voice in the classroom, or they're actually involved in planning and making choices in the classroom. So I think that has to be a part of what that culture is that he's looking at. Are they just a checkpoint of, hey, what do you think of this idea? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Or they're actually involved in the participation process.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I saw that based upon evidence, we can impact students' growth mindset. There is evidence in the readings, and there's some other things that you got to consider also. But we can change cultural thinking by assisting and helping develop students' growth mindset.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am, and I'll come right back to you.
The point about belongingness in the academic community is central to all that we're trying to do. And as they come to us, they come with varied histories and senses of self-concepts. And so what I find really hard and challenging in schools as we talk about goals and strategies and rubrics is getting to that very elemental sense that if students have self-doubt and negative self-perceptions or never felt bullied or whatever, how do we tap into that by the sheer nature of how we interact with our students so that they gain access to that? That to me is the actual gateway to all the other stuff we talk about. And I feel like so many of our meetings, it has to come back to that, but I don't know how to get to the strategies that are going to harness the trajectory. I mean, here at the very end, it kind of talks about you don't have to change the whole structure, you actually just have to have the right strategies. And so how do we, when we're trying to do all this new tech stuff, get to the heart of the relationships that allow students to feel a sense of belonging?
And what I heard you say is, how do we take what all of our students come to school with and transition that through our interactions with them? Not just one person, not just a couple of us, but the entire staff. How do we shift that? Yes, ma'am.
Well, as I was reading, I was like, oh, that makes sense. This all seems really obvious. But I was left with some questions of how do you practically make all students and all of your learners feel like they belong? We start the year strong with some cool culture building activities and team builders, but they kind of dissipate throughout the year. So kind of how to develop consistent culture building that happens throughout the entire year, school-wide, but also in each classroom, and then when students get new teams, which they inevitably do, and have to work with new people, and being such a small school, reputations happen really quickly, judgments happen really quickly, and what are practical ways to break that down? Also, being in high school, team builders only go so far, and there's that sense of, these are kind of silly, or this is kind of dumb. How do you make them more meaningful and lasting? And I was also left with the question of how do you change that middle school mindset? Being, the only new tech school in our district and doing PBL, there's, again, a lot of beliefs in our community that, we're one way. How do we break that down for our students and our parents? How do you change the parent mindset, which is oftentimes focused on the grade or different things, not, what this is really saying.
So what I hear you saying is that not only is there's a bigger picture that we must also consider as we try to build systematic structures in place to transition our students into their lives. This is their culture that we're trying to transition. And it comes with a lot. Thank you for that. And I'm going to take one more comment, and we're going to transition. Yes, ma'am.
I took a leap because I was thinking about our teachers in terms of what their own agency and sense of control in terms of their contribution to the culture is. Because I could right now sit in a staff meeting and identify those that feel empowered to impact the culture, that feel like they understand the tenets of project-based learning to be a model for others, and those that feel like they're along for the ride and hope that someday it makes sense. I'm wondering how we build that asset model into our teachers so they can model it for our students. In essence, how do you identify your strengths to the team right now? What do you bring to the table now, and what are you working on? Because if our teachers don't feel comfortable with the model and with articulating these same things, that I believe my effort pays off in this way, I don't know that a strong professional culture has a fighting chance to make a difference with kids until they understand it. So I went directly to how I empower my teachers with the same thinking before we even jump to the students. I mean, I'm a messy thinker, so I'll do both at the same time.
I like
but
that.
I'm really, really thinking the teachers need the benefit of also building up this skill we teach them.
I like that. And what's really great about what everyone is saying in the room is that it gets back to the leading self, then leading others. And how are we empowering our staff to think about these academic mindsets? Really, our teachers and facilitators, and along with as leaders, we come with some pre-consisting things and issues. So how are we shifting our mindsets along with shifting and supporting our staffs around shifting their mindsets? Awesome. Before we even get to the students. And that is key. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
thing we have to do every year, and I realize it every year, is we have a brand new batch of students coming in every year. And it's important every year to find out who the movers and shakers are in the students. I'm meeting with two groups of students right now who are juniors and seniors because I'm looking for more consistency in PBL and the way the teachers are teaching. But you have to find those kids who influence other kids and get them to buy in first, because that will spread if you find out if you know who the leaders are. And you have to do that every year because you lose your seniors, and then you get, if you have a middle school, you have a new batch of 6th graders or whatever grade they're coming in at. but I think it's really important as a leader that you're talking to those kids who you know influence other kids.
Okay, awesome. I did say that was the last comment, but I hate to, I'll come back to you and then we'll close with you. Yes, sir.
I was just going to comment on the talk about the family and how there are those families that are only focused, say, on the grade. But then there was this line in here that to the extent that students identify with a social group for whom academic achievement is not the norm, they may lower expectations for their own academic success to match those perceived as being normative for the group. I have a lot of students whose families could not care less about academic growth. And how, as a school, do we counterbalance that? I mean, that's not just a social group. That's far deeper than that. So that's just a question that came up, but it was kind of brought up by the parents. Like they're on both sides.
Thank you for bringing it up, and we will end here. Yes, ma'am.
I go back to feedback that you were saying earlier, that I think the trust of others, the trust of thyself by the students, and no matter how much you are consistent, you allow them to have that voice, because they have not had that voice. My kids don't come from a tech school, they come from the community, they come from the middle school there. And I think that every time we give the students that voice and that leadership, and it doesn't have to be a formal leadership, it can be a whole concept of different ideas. And every time you give those kids that voice, you build that trust, not only in you, but within themselves. And I have seen dramatic changes. And I'm in my 7th year now, and like you said, we have to start that whole thing all over again every time. But how many times does it take you to talk about practice? How many times does it take us to get something right? I mean, and we're expecting them to pick it up and run with it after the first orientation. So don't give yourself up, don't give up.
Thank you. I appreciate you for sharing, giving students a voice. I think that is also a part of the shift that we can make when we know that our students are going out into their communities and their parents, but empowering them with a voice could be essential to that shift that you want to see. So ladies and gentlemen, I know that you guys have some great dialogue happening and some thoughts are running in your head and more questions. What I want to do is, our next step is, each table has a pink sticky note with one of the 4 academic mindsets on your table. I either put it on your table or Jim placed it on your table. What we want to do is, there's some chart paper around the room and you've been assigned that academic mindset. And we want to give you some time to really think about these 4 questions around that one particular mindset, which is another reason why we wanted to separate the thought partners around this work. First, on the chart paper, we really want you to have put the name and definition of your academic mindset, and we have more chart paper if you need more. How is it linked to intellectual development or academic performance? What natural levers are there for this mindset within the New Tech model? We talked a lot about structures, existing structures that we may have. What are the levers that we already have in place that could possibly continue to cultivate this academic mindset within our schools? And I love it that earlier you brought up around teachers and students. How do we continue to cultivate that? And then what school policy, structures, and or practices have the potential to influence this mindset? Okay. Any clarifying questions before we move into the work? All right, so we'll give you some time. The pink sticky note, if it's near you, you may want to share it with everyone at the table. Start to think about these 4 questions. If you need chart paper closer to you, we will bring it closer to you. If we need to move some around, we can. We'll bring markers to you, whatever resources that you need. And be sure to dig a little deeper into the text as you can continue to think through these 4 questions. All right, so we'll give you some time to get started, and we're going to check in with each table. Okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, if you could post your sticky on the wall. As I worked around the room, Jim and I, some great dialogue is taking place. And I really appreciate the fact that you all are really digging deeply in this work around the 4 academic mindsets. But now we want to give you some time. I know a couple of groups were like, make sure you put the numbers just in case we have to explain who's going to present, so you know the next step. But this time, we're not going to just have you share out or present. What we're going to do is have a gallery walk and give each of you the opportunity to go around the room and possibly look at the different academic mindsets from those 4 questions, what came up at each table. You may see your same academic mindset that you were working through on the other side of the room, and some other things may come up for you. And these are the guiding questions that we want you to consider as you move about the room and take a look at the 4 academic mindsets. Okay? So, okay.
Just a quick clarifying point about the question. So 1, real informal. Talk about this with those around you at the moment. Okay? The 2, recognize the first 2 questions are about your collective understanding as a school and the way you collectively are an acting agency. The 3rd question is about you, your personal thinking and understanding around agency right now. So just make sure that's a clear distinction as you talk about those questions.
Any questions? So let's get up, and you can pick an academic mindset you want to start and just continue to just move. If we can move clockwise, I think that will help the room, help the flow. Very informal.
Going with the salmon. Salmon babies. Do you know it's just where we landed? We were so we were advanced. More
So very quickly, just in a moment or 2 here, and before we kind of keep moving, there's kind of one more piece we want to work through, and then get you a break before we kind of get into the second half of our agenda. But just kind of coming back to these initial questions that we looked at, you used to generate the posters. Anything big coming up for you at this moment in your own thinking or understanding your own agency? Okay, so now you're not being honest because you all told me stuff when I was on.
One of the things was around doing this work with teachers and how we, as leaders, model, support, reflect, and do the kinds of things that we want our teachers to be, shaping that environment and thinking about that teaching, and how our role at that stage of the organization can play a really significant part in ensuring that there's coherency.
That was a big thing for several groups, just like, why are we thinking about this separately for students and staff?
Mm-hmm.
That was a big one for a number of groups. Troy?
Something that I thought was interesting was that when we were circling around creating, I think, iterative cycles of kids to be able to demonstrate standards, because there's nothing that says they should have to learn it on September 7th. Why isn't October 4th good enough? I mean, but the reality is the kids that, for us anyway, generally say, okay, I do want to retake that test, or I would like to revise that written piece, or can I give an oral presentation to you alone, are kind of the ones we deem the grade grubbers. Like, I want to move from the 89 to the 91%, please. And what we want to build is that agency in all of our students. And so we have to build that in the project-based learning cycle of we're going to give you a rubric graph without a grade on it, and no, we're not putting it in the grade book until you revise.
Right.
So you have to create those systems where your, I guess, the currency, which is the grade, matches your values. And then if you go in to just do an audit of ECHO right now, like work ethic may be tremendously saturated. So it doesn't matter how hard a kid works. If they get 20 work ethic points, so what? It's like 20 out of 500 in comparison to the 3 curricular literacy scores. So there does come a component where you have to look at the logistics. Do your logistics support your values? Do your logistics promote this?
Yeah, so there's a pretty straight arrow coming out of Troy's comment pointing to this last question.
Yeah.
Right? Really, it's not just about sort of the instructional interaction, right? It's all the things that happen around that are also a part of the way this gets developed for students and staff, or does not develop for students. Anything else big before we again kind of move forward?
I like what I saw on that chart over there about the organizational learning aspect, because even tied to what Troy was just saying, you know, in order for students to be able to achieve this deeper learning and, you know, the iterative cycles, to be able to manage all the tasks that they're bombarded with through ECHO and otherwise is something I feel like has to be part of what allows them to grow, and we need to support that. And I feel like we run up against that either indirectly or directly in everything we do. So, you know, are we really honoring students when they come to us who really are young and don't have that even aspect of their brain developed to help them organizationally, or do we bombard them with an expectation that they're not ready for? And they'll grow in it, but maybe we need to parse it out at an incremental pace. Like one parent was saying, why do you have to use every tab in ECHO the first week of school? You know, I have a 14-year-old and I thought that's realistic feedback, because that's a lot to expect. It's a unique interface. It's not like anything else they use. So, you know, understanding that and weaving that into the iterative cycle so that we have that more on a continuum rather than here's all this stuff, now we do it again. I just think it's depth of the breadth, but also incrementally bigger.
And really having a clear path for how that builds over time, right?
Yeah.
The experience that students are having. Stacey, you're next.
Well, I was actually thinking about something that she just said in my conversation. On the stage, both of them struck me was the idea that we can scaffold it. Little success leads to bigger success. Those are trying to think about what agency, not even think about every student, every goal of the agency. So rather than letting that deter us, how can we scaffold that? What would a little agency look like?
Great. And this group over here, right, we talked about this in a session yesterday afternoon, captured Dan Pink's 3 great synthesis of research on motivation, right? One of which is mastery. And one thing that's really compelling is the ability to see ourselves getting better at something, but you have to do the structure of the work so you can actually see that. Right? That's what kind of Stacey's talking about.
One thing that, that statement, like, I can succeed at this. What I was thinking is, we talk about growth mindset. Just like food is needed for you to grow and survive, I think kids need to understand that learning is necessary for survival, just for survival. It's not for winning or losing or succeeding. I think that kids have to understand that, hey, we don't learn, we don't grow. It's not for winning or losing or succeeding. It's, because I was, in my personal experience, I was preparing my daughter for spelling bee champion. So we are preparing, and my daughter is asking, Dad, why are we doing this? Do you want me to just go and win this? Is that what we're doing? I said, yeah, we are preparing for winning, right? The question was, so will you be upset that if I lose, will you be upset? That made me think. I said, don't worry about winning or losing. Let's prepare, so that you can be the best of the best when you get there. Because when you get there, if you are not prepared, you cannot even participate. So just to go there and survive, you need to prepare. So it's not about winning or losing. And it's coming up.
So a quick kind of summary point here, because and you know, Bobby Moretti says sort of the growth mindset. I can succeed at this. Here's actually, I think, a mistake we've made as a network early on in our work around this, which is we have allowed the conversation around growth mindset to substitute for the whole conversation around agency.
Mm-hmm.
One of the points we want to make to you this morning is that there is more to think about and understand if you're really serious about cultivating agency than just growth mindset. It's a really important piece, but there are other mindsets at work that we have to think about and think about where are the places that kids are getting this sort of feedback reinforcement in our schools. Okay? So we've had growth mindset is a topic that everyone is talking about, and it's a huge one. And it's also the most tangible thing we're working to cultivate in our kids. Right? But getting to that and certainly getting to agency requires more. Okay, so that's a big thing for us. Yeah.
Yes.
In many ways. We actually had, when we were working on this agency, or on the agency rubric last year, a big dialogue about does it make sense to try to assess growth mindset?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had a big sort of philosophical debate about, you know, do you do that and how do you do that? A couple other quick things we're going to move forward here. Related to that, this question is all about thinking about, and you captured this nicely on some of your posters, right? That there's more than, the two elements of our agency rubric are growth mindset and learning strategies. But like we just said, there's actually more to developing agency than just growth mindset. And so part of what we want you to think about this morning too is all the things you might do to work on agency don't all live in the agency rubric. There are other natural components of our work, the way we talk about and approach culture, the way you use technology to engender sort of independence and sort of responsibility for your own learning. There are other natural places in our work that are levers for these other mindsets. We want you to think about and grapple with what those are and think about how you can pull on those. And then lastly, this other point, the grade is already coming up, right? It's not just about the instructional interaction that Matt and I have. It's also about all the things that surround that. Policies, structures, practices that are a regular part of our environment. And so we've got to start thinking about how do we have a deep understanding of these four things, right? And use that to start massaging and working on all of those structures and policies and practices that animate our school. And a quick comment about what you just did. So what we tried to do actually is create a set of artifacts that you're going to use a little bit later on this morning as you get into working on your specific school. Okay? So these should be sort of reference tools that you can go back to as you begin to actually start to work on your specific school context a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So when we are, did we go? Okay. So now we're going to reconnect with the text again. And I love your story about your daughter. And it takes a shift when you're doing this work and thinking through this work, especially when I have a high school student and we're thinking through what college. She actually said, I'm going to write to this college to see if they can send me their admission information. And I said, well, can't you just Google that? But I was like, no, but no one writes to the colleges anymore to figure out, to get that information. You do that and we'll Google, so when you're thinking through this work and how it's just one thing that our students can say or our children can say that make us connect back to these academic mindsets and how we can shift our interactions, as like we were talking about earlier, with our students. So now we're really going to think about some actionable strategies that can be implemented in our classrooms or in our schools around shifting the mindsets. So I want you to return back to the text, the same text we were reading, and we are going to take about 10 minutes, bless you, to reconnect with pages 32 through 37. It's actually, and the pages may be a little different. So the section...
Yeah, so those are the page numbers on the document.
Right.
The PDF page numbers that will be selected.
Right. So the page numbers on the actual document, pages 32 through 37. And we're going to focus on a particular section in the document. are there actionable strategies for developing academic mindsets as part of classroom practice? And you should see that section in bold. So I want you to take about 10 minutes to silently reconnect with that text, because now we're moving from breaking down the mindsets to now thinking about strategies.
All right, we're going to bring us back very quickly. It's encouraging that you have so much to say about the topic. Okay. We're going to stop and head to a break in just a moment. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. There are coffee and refreshments right outside. When we come back, if you haven't already found your way back to your thought partner or partners, we are going to be really focused on your school team when you come back. So situate yourself in that way when you come back. One quick comment that came up at a few different tables as we were floating in this last conversation is we heard several people say, there's nothing as we read about these 4 academic mindsets and we read this literature review, there's nothing like revolutionary. Mm-hmm. Like that never occurred to me before. But the recognition that we're not attending to all those dimensions of agency. Right? So the big insight around, it's not so much that this is stuff we've never heard of, as much as it's about the degree of intentionality with which we are approaching our work around agency. So keep that in mind as we come back. Have a nice break. At 10:10, we're going to crank it up and get going. Or excuse me, it's 11:10, isn't it? 11:10. All right, we are going to go ahead and get going again. Really the balance of time we have until lunch is going to be trying to get you quickly into work mode and really having you dig into your school environment, okay? A few things to set that up very quickly. So one, we'll make a comment about the method we're employing here that's different than the last couple of leadership summits, particularly for those of you that have been attending our last few leadership summits. So really going back to the spring of last year, we've been in a mode where we tried to pull out something happening in a school that we thought was, for one reason or another, really a great exemplary practice. From that, we've tried to extract a general set of principles, and then we've said, think about how you can apply these principles to your context and try to emulate and apply that right now. Right? And that's been our basic approach the last 2 to 3 leadership summits. We're taking a different tact here, and we want to point this out because it's a different conversation we're trying to have right now. Right? Which is, so we started with trying to really get into some literature, and again, we also tried to push on our thinking by trying to get you talking to people that you don't normally talk to, right? To hear different people's understanding and thinking about a topic that aren't a regular part of your thought network. We've been building up to, and are going to get into now, a really sort of deep phase of trying to be really critical about current practice. Right? That does not quite as feel good. It doesn't feel quite as good as the top scenario here. So just want to be honest that, if it's feeling uncomfortable or that's actually what we're trying to get to. Right? So just recognize that doesn't mean something's going wrong. Right? We're actually trying to have a different conversation than the one we've been setting up the last couple of summits. Okay? So you guys zeroed in on this pretty quickly, right? But just to be explicit, right? We've seen a lot of, he sort of maps out, or the team sort of maps out these 2 basic, right? You can intervene kind of at the student level, right? You can try to change that, or we can actually talk about the environment that student lives in and the way in which all the pieces of that environment are or are not aligned to cultivating agency, okay? We obviously don't think it's an either or, but we also think right now there's very little of the bold happening in our network, right? That's where we want to focus you. Okay? That's where we want to focus your thought and energy for the last 45 minutes before we head into lunch, and really tomorrow as well, right? Not thinking about the narrow intervention for the student as much as what's the experience they're having, and we're going to do that by trying to focus you on a very specific policy or structure, and we'll get to that in a second. Okay. I think one more. So we'll skip this for now. Yeah. Last thing we want to do is we're going to sort of force your hand here around a point you guys again zeroed in on very quickly this morning, right? And Ed Briseno makes this in some of his writing about mindset, where he says you start with the adults. Right? So in a minute, when we ask you to think about, when Starla prompts you to try to zero in as a school team on a policy or structure you want to talk about, we're going to ask you to think about an adult structure. Something that's designed to sort of organize and animate the life of the adults in your school. Okay? So we're really going to, and we'll get to the student piece, but we're going to ask you to start with the adults. And again, it's a point you guys zeroed in on really quickly this morning. Okay? All right, Starla, put us to work.
Good, wonderful. So, as we were talking earlier during our break and throughout the day, we really got to the place of before we can start with students, we must start with the adults. We must start with the facilitators, especially around these academic mindsets. Okay? So what I want you to do is in your school teams, if you're not with your thought partner, if you don't have a thought partner, that's okay. Jim and I are here, and someone is at the table to work together because this is a network. Take a moment to visualize a structure or a policy centered around adult learning, organized around adults. Okay? And then what we want you to do is try to connect with one that has been problematic or challenging for your school. And I do want to say that we are using the word policy very loosely, so not necessarily something that's mandated, but a norm or some type of practice or structure that is in place that seems to be centered around the adults. So an example could be teacher evaluation, policy or structure that you want to think through. So take a moment to visualize a structure or practice designed to organize the work of adults. I'm sorry. Yes. You can get them. Oh, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, so it's a really important question.
It is.
Right? And we got a lot of chuckles, and there's a good reason for that. Right? And the question, if you didn't hear it, was, does it need to be a policy that we can actively change? Right? And there's two answers to that question that are connected. So the first obvious answer is yes. We don't want you to spend a whole lot of time talking about something that is beyond your control.
Right.
We also would like to push you to think about that there might be places where you have more control than you realize. Or that maybe you're currently tapping into. Okay? So I would just say, don't default to the I can't control that.
Right. Right. So think about, and I see conversations are already starting or are developing. So take a few moments to really think of that particular problematic or challenging policy or structure. Go ahead. That you want to tackle and think about.
They should be in school teams now.
Wonderful. Thank you. So what we want to do is give you the opportunity. We have a document that has been created to help guide your thinking around this policy. And it is actually uploaded into Echo in a briefcase. And we want to give you the opportunity to download this document, and it is entitled Policy Analysis Protocol. Okay? So you've had some time to really think through a couple of policies or structures that you want to consider working through on today. But once you log into Echo and you go into the briefcase, you should see the document entitled Policy Analysis Protocol. And it is posted in the NTN agency resources, and you want to go ahead and download that actual document. Once you download that document, what we're going to do is really take you step by step through this actual document, because we want you to spend time actually digging deeply into this actual policy or structure that you want to consider or shift. Okay. So once you download the document, at the very top, the first thing we want you to do is to write the description of the actual policy. Just write the description. What does it look like? What does it look like as it exists right now? Okay. So take some time to just focus on the description of the actual policy you want to focus on.
Scott and I this summer gonna have a retreat.
Have your attention for one moment, please. Yeah.
Where did the
So
time go?
Just going around the room really quickly, because we want to get you out for lunch, and time is we never have enough time. But I would love for someone to just share out what current policy they're thinking through. If you're willing to just share out, what policy are you? Oh, yes.
We have built into our schedule time in which teachers can go and have intervisitations and go and look in one another's classrooms, provide quality feedback. We find that the time isn't really used. That the feedback isn't really applied. And there's a million reasons for kind of dig into, but how to improve that and get multiple sources of feedback for our teachers.
Okay. And so from that description, and the first step is, what is the policy communicating currently around, you can choose one of the academic mindsets to just sort of talk through.
So belonging to the community, that it's important that feedback comes from multiple sources and that all staff members can contribute to the growth of their colleagues. Or the developing a growth mindset that by seeking regular feedback and engaging in ongoing discussions of best practices with colleagues, and all staff members can improve on their practice. But this is, I've noticed that I've only gone through this first document, they all end with "we appear to."
Okay, okay. We appear to. Awesome. I think my Central Coast team, you guys have a pretty, I love the policy that you guys are thinking through, a description and description.
So we have our policy is a family orientation plan. Of course, we set up an ECHO to help facilitate the transition of our new teachers. Not only was the majority of our new staff new to our school, they were brand new professionals. So we had communicated that you're part of the family, that you belong with us. But at the same time, it also communicated that we know everything and we're going to teach you how to be an awesome teacher, which was hard, I think, for a lot of new teachers, just being new to teaching in itself and new to TDL, very overwhelmed, a little scared, not able to maybe feel comfortable trying to teach and then failing at our school. And so we're just kind of working on, this policy communicated, I think, kind of a double standard there. Like the intentions are really good, and it communicates really nice things on the outside, but kind of at that deeper level, it's also not communicating the best of things. And that's kind of as far as we got, though. We're trying to rework.
It's how the message was delivered, I think.
Yeah. And how to make them a part of it, and how we can learn from them, just as much as they can learn from us.
Thank you all so much for sharing that. And I know that you possibly just got to the first two steps in the document, because you were really trying to unpack the current policy, by writing policy or structure, by writing the description, what does it look like the way that it is right now? Right now. And then what is it communicating through those 4 academic mindsets, starting with the adults? What are we communicating? And I love the attempt to, and then I think it's communicating this to really unpack what are we seeing and experiencing through this current policy. Yeah. The next step we didn't get to in here, but you know, we do love homework sometimes. But it's step 2. It's thinking about the actual evidence. The actual evidence you have about the policy's impact on the mindset development. So it's talking about actual interactions, things you've heard, things you've seen with your teachers, on your staff. So really talking about actual evidence when we think through these policies. Okay? And then, of course, you can explore each mindset from observed behavior and then echo. I heard a lot of dialogue around the echo and the structure of it, the instructional core, and then direct policy feedback, formal and informal. A lot of dialogue around that. So I know that you're in that place, but really trying to break down and unpack each mindset around that actual policy. Okay. So I think we shift to your next slide.
So just a quick, just a couple minutes from getting out of here, just sort of a quick reflection on what you've actually been doing this morning. I was joking with the group yesterday that when Drew Schroeder and I facilitated a session here, and I was joking that it doesn't matter what session you come to, there's one of 2 slides that's going to go up on the screen. So this is one of those 2 slides. So how many of you are at least a little bit familiar or have seen this before? Yeah, there are 2 artifacts that really sit at the center of the way we think about leadership development and the types of experiences we try to design for you as leaders in your schools. One of those is a learning organization framework, which was the one we were joking about last night. And the second one is this one. It's 5 domains for leadership development. So what are the 5 sort of buckets of skills we think people need to lead at a really high level in a new tech environment? And where we've had you, what the experience you've had so far today, and to a larger extent the whole summit, is really about is the bottom right-hand corner, designing learning systems. Okay. And so here's our sort of quick definition of that. Let me just pause for a second. So how does what you've been doing this morning reflect this definition in any way? Yeah.
I guess really a huge part of being college and career ready is all of agency, right? You can't really succeed in college or life without agency and all the different domains of it. So thinking about if that's really our goal as new tech schools to just prepare our students for that, then we're kind of dissecting all of our current policies and structures that we have, and do they actually match that? Are they actually things that all teachers, all classrooms, the whole school is doing to get them to have that agency in all of those domains?
Great. So the 2 things in that response that I think are really important. So one, we went to kind of the college and career readiness piece, but you can also think of that as kind of a macro purpose. Within our conversation this morning, we've been talking about a micro purpose, agency. I want to cultivate agency in my students, or and more generally in my school, right? And so the first piece is, what are we doing and how does it serve that purpose? Or does it serve that purpose? Right? And then there's a comment about dissecting kind of what we're doing, right? So the first step in this is your ability to sort of ferret out sources of misalignment. Where are places where what we're actually doing, what's a policy, a practice, a structure, aren't aligned with what we're trying to accomplish? Right? So we actually haven't gotten to the design part yet. Right? But before you can do that, you got to be able to figure out what is not pointing in the right direction yet. Right? This is a massive sort of skill set and frame of mind for school leaders. Right? Stacey and I were talking just a moment ago about the volume of things that show up at your door and people ask you to implement. Almost none of those are constructed with your school and your mission and your students in mind. So someone has got to take responsibility for helping really think about, okay, even if I have to do this, even if it's not a choice, how do I get it pointed at our sense of purpose as a school? And how do I get it pointed at specific things that we're trying to create for our students? No one, in the way we typically organize schools, is better situated to do that than the school leadership. Whether that's an individual or a leadership team or what have you, no one is better situated to do that. Okay? This is a huge, huge piece. I also want to point out it's a departure from a lot of literature on principal leadership, which focuses on the principal going classroom to classroom and giving feedback to teachers. Right? And we wouldn't argue that that's not something that school leaders are going to engage, whether you're a principal or you have another role. We would not argue that that's not something you're going to do. We are arguing you have a role in creating a total environment that's as or more important than just your ability to walk from room to room and give feedback to people. And that's the work we're really doing this morning, and we're going to continue tomorrow morning. We have a little bit of homework for you. Sorry. So one, I think you can even just sort of do this casually to the extent that you didn't, people were in different spots around the room in terms of where they were and working through the protocol. To the extent that you didn't get to the second phase where you started to talk about evidence and impact, just have that conversation over dinner or at the reception or where you have a moment. You don't have to sit down and like fill out the form, but start having that conversation. Two, we're going to ask you to actually dig into the next chapter in that piece of literature you were looking at today, chapter 6, which is all about learning strategies, right? Which you'll know is the second chunk of our agency rubric. Okay. Any questions about that? Thanks for a great morning. Have a good lunch and a great rest of the day.
Thank you. It's the video.
Okay.
Maybe, hopefully it's not too loud.
Morning, everybody. Welcome back. We are going to go ahead and get started. We'll probably have a few people trickle in as we go, as people are getting checked out of hotel rooms and that kind of stuff. But we're going to go ahead and get started this morning. We gave you a little bit of homework last night, which we felt a little bit guilty about. But later when we saw all of you out not doing it, we felt less guilty about it. But actually, later on in the full research article that we've been pulling excerpts from over the course of these 2 days, there's actually a section, right, that really it's a literature review, right? And there's a section that really details all the studies that they looked at. And there's one study that they reference in particular that's about this study where they actually tempt kids with marshmallows. And so we're actually going to show you a short little video of that just to get going this morning. And as something lighthearted just to get us up and running here. So, whoa. Just in case you weren't awake. All right.
All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, I'll give you another one if you wait, or eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another. Stay here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. I'm gonna go do something, and I'll I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay.
She's like, you can come get it. I got it.
So, well, we just thought that was really funny. But see, we kind of left you in the middle of a process yesterday that we're going to try to get the rest of the way through. So, sorry, getting done something wrong with your mic wave back there. Better? Okay. We kind of left you in the lurch in that we were about halfway through a process. And so today you're going to get your metaphorical marshmallow, which we hope is as exciting as that kid at the end. But we want to sort of finish this process that we're working through. We tried to do a few things yesterday. First of all, right, we came in and connected with one another and with some literature in an effort to try to build a more robust understanding and a more sophisticated understanding of what's at work when we're trying to develop agency. And particularly, specifically what we're trying to get beyond is allowing growth mindset to be the whole conversation about agency, right? Trying to get to a recognition there's more at play here that we've got to sort of come to terms with if we're really going to do this well for our schools. And then second, we started you into this protocol where we were trying to get you to use, right, your new thinking around agency to break down a policy or a structure that's in place in your schools, and specifically one for adults in your school. Okay? And that's kind of where we stopped. And so we asked you to get into chapter 6 from that research article last night, which is all about learning strategies. And so we're going to quickly kind of get you back into that text. Starla, did you assign people
No, I did not.
tables?
I can do that really quickly.
Okay. So we're going to get you back in very similarly to what you did yesterday in terms of connecting with the text. We're going to have you working just in the groups that you are in at your tables. And in that... just walk around and tell them.
Okay.
Did you change it already? You did it.
Mm-hmm.
In the chapter, they talk about 4 cognitive processes, right, that really are sit underneath all these learning strategies, or this idea of learning strategies, right? They talk about metacognition, right? They talk about time management, talk about effective goal setting, right? And they talk about self-regulation, right? As these are the cognitive processes we're trying to tap into with learning strategies. So Starla's going to come around and assign each table one of those processes, right? One of those 4 processes. And we quickly want you as a group, again, to generate an artifact for us on chart paper that captures, first of all, just simply what's the process that you were assigned, what's the simple definition of it, okay? Second, what's the connection between that cognitive process and academic performance, okay? And then lastly, we want you to think of, you guys have tons of learning strategies. You do this all the time. You do this for a living, in fact. Right? So we want you to think of really concrete examples of learning strategies that tap into whatever process that you've got. Okay? These can be ones that you've used before. You can break out Google and look for ones, right? These can be ones from resources that we're not connected to in this session at all right now, and that's fine. But we want to generate a list of concrete examples of learning strategies you know of or have used yourself that connect with that process that you're talking about. Okay? Any clarifying questions about what this next little bit of work time is for you? Great, so once Starla is at your table, we'll be putting chart paper up for you again. Once Starla is at your table and you've got your process, you can get to it. All right. Okay. We are going to move forward. It's all right if you're not quite finished, but again, we're just going to allow for some sort of really informal conversation around these. We want you to get connected and sort of rooted in these ideas the same way yesterday we were trying to root you in a set of ideas and then really use those as tools when you go back to working on your school in a minute. We're on the same trajectory. So these ideas that we're trying to connect you with right now are things we're going to ask you to use in just a minute when you come back to looking at your school really closely in a moment. So same process as yesterday. Very informal gallery walk. We want you to make sure you don't have to necessarily look at all 8 posters, but make sure you look at one that represents each of the 4 different cognitive processes that were represented in the room. And there are a few places, right, where there's, and this is true of the whole document, where there's not perfect clarity about stuff, right? There's a conversation about study skills, and it's not really clear what they mean by study skills in the section. So those are places where you might have conversation with whoever's around you. And again, this third question we also want you to pay attention to, right? What are examples, get connected to concrete examples that tap into whatever process you're looking at. All right? It'll take just about 5 minutes. Casual conversation and gallery walk. All right?
That's what we're going to give them the optional time to go back to.
Yeah.
Because it says 3.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have.
Yeah, because we're going to put, I think, we put 3 in front and say, if you were still working on 2, go back to 2. That's fine. But if you're ready to move forward, this is where you're at now.
Okay.
And probably we should say, recognize your ability to do a good job with 3 is contingent upon whether or not you get a good job at 2.
Yeah. I'm sorry to put my bag in your chair.
You're fine. I'm not going to sit in it. Excuse me. All right, let's come back together here. We're going to make some quick sense of this and try to get you working here pretty fast, which is really what most of our morning should be, which is you working and trying to apply some ideas here. This is when, let me brace you, this is when the hard work starts, okay, if it hasn't already started for you. So one, really love seeing people walking around the room taking pictures of the artifacts, right? We do, every time we get together like this, we believe there should be artifacts that come out of the time we spend together. So really like seeing people capture those. And again, even as we move into this next step of work in a moment here, right, these are artifacts, these are reference tools for you in the room as you're doing the work, right? So as you get stuck thinking about something, go back to that reference point or go to one of the posters about whatever it is you're talking about and use that, right, to grapple with whatever it is you're thinking about and find a way forward, okay? What we're going to ask you to do now, yesterday the first two steps of the process again were identifying, we talked about this big theme that came out of all of our conversation in the reading yesterday, which is adults. Like we've missed kind of the adult piece, and we even asked you to start there, right? And then we used those ideas about agency to start taking whatever adult policy or structure you use. We had a team working on a teacher induction process. We had a team working on a teacher evaluation process. We had several different things happening in the room, right? But whatever policy or structure you chose, to use those ideas to start breaking it down and saying, are these academic mindsets at work in this particular policy or structure? And now we're going to get to the point where what we're going to ask you to do is we want you to redesign it. Right, so to the extent that part of your analysis yesterday led you to unearth some sort of misalignment or some sort of place where you said, this isn't quite right about the way we've put this together so far. Now the work is to redesign it. Right, now that you've identified that, let's figure out how we're going to revise this practice or structure or policy so that it gets more pointed at what you're trying to accomplish. In this case, very specifically, trying to cultivate agency. And even more specifically, for adults. Okay? And what we want you to really have in the front of your mind as you do that are these ideas about learning strategies. And what we want, as you set about the work of redesign, what we want you to think about and make an attempt to do explicitly is redesign the policy or structure or practice around an explicit learning strategy. So that just by interacting with this, just by going through the teacher induction process, I'm actually experiencing a learning strategy. Just by going through the process of student discipline in my school, I'm actually experiencing a learning strategy. Right? Just by going through the process of teacher feedback and evaluation in my school, I'm experiencing a learning strategy. Again, that is designed to get at these processes. Okay? That's a big ask, right? And while we generated a lot, Christian said over here, his comment was, look, we generated all these ideas. We know so much already. That's absolutely right. But we're also asking you to do something that we feel is not typical, right? Which is, our approach to these strategies is as an instructional task in a room, an instructional interaction in a room. And going back to the other big theme of our conversation yesterday, right, which is about the instructional interactions are important, but it's also the whole environment. It's all those things that sit around the classroom and sit around the adults and the students in the school that have an impact on cultivating or undermining agency as well. And so now what we're saying is, let's go after all those things sitting around the instructional interactions as well, okay? So really, whatever policy, whatever structure, whatever practice you were working on, we want you to think about a very specific learning. It can be one that was named. It can be one you create. It can be one you've used before. It doesn't matter. But a very specific learning strategy, and really try to design that structure or policy around it. Is that good enough to get you started? Okay. Second thing, yeah, Starla, do you want to do that?
No, yeah. I think you're going to it. Step number 2. Reminding them about step
number 2.
Yeah, go ahead.
2. Yeah, I thought that's where you were going.
Oh. I thought that was where you were going too. On yesterday, during the protocol, most of the room was pretty much past step 1, where you were writing your description of the current policy, and you were getting into step number 2 around what is it communicating to the staff and to others around those particular learning strategies. What I want you to do is focus on step number 2. If you have not completed step number 2 before you get to step 3, because the success around and the deeper you go with step 2, you will see more success with step number 3. Okay. So don't take your time, think through step number 2 if you didn't have some time to think through that on last night, but definitely we want you to get here to this point where you are considering the learning strategies. Okay. Just wanted to remind you of that. And one last thing I want to bring to your attention. Yesterday during the reflection time, one big theme was around paying attention to being intentional and being purposeful around the work. And that's where you are. Intentional and purposeful around the work for adults and for the students. Okay. All right. So we'll let you guys get started with your work. Ladies and gentlemen,
Not hosting a conference.
if I can have your attention for 1 second, please.
Any of that business, but creating the time and space and like talk over.
I really just want to bring you all together. I see that you are really thinking through this work, but I would love for some process checking. Where are you? What are some things that are coming up for you as you're digging into this work? Anyone willing to share out some things that are coming up for you as you're going through this process? Yeah, issues or struggles or bright spots, whatever you're willing to share.
I think for us, we have teachers that are really focused on content. They want to make sure they get their old standards clear, and others that are more focused on skills and agency. You get those come together with a focus.
Trying to bring it together and
It's going to be a process.
It is. It is.
Can I just ask what was
Yes.
the practice or structure or policy you guys have been working on? Pat?
Oh, I'm sorry?
What's the thing you guys have been working on in terms of like the practice or policy or structure that you guys have been?
Staff will collaborate on a regular basis to have common goals and objectives for each grade level and discipline, being intentional and purposeful in our strategy.
Was there a particular learning strategy that you wanted to focus on as you?
Agency, first of all,
Okay.
for everyone, and then later focus on disciplines, because our studies classes are English and social science. We don't teach anything else right now. So there's some very different skills we want kids to learn at those different grade levels within studies and then within math. We have some different goals and objectives that we want to get through over a 4-year period. So first of all, agency, and then focusing on discipline. Different disciplines. That's a big chunk, so we're focusing on agency first.
That is. And
to try to get them away from
They don't have to wonder anything anymore.
You're so right. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else willing to share out where they are in this process? Yes.
So we're still struggling. I mean, as far as I think actually your probing questions, they're really good. And they make Jen and I really think about where we're at with, it's like, okay, we keep going back to our initial policy description. Look at it, and it's like, okay, we have that in there. But I think we're where we need to be.
I think ultimately we moved from a standalone new teacher orientation plan into just embedding all of that and all of those good intentions of what we wanted to make that orientation plan, embed that throughout all of our staff interaction time. So whether that be our
Fantastic.
early out meetings, staff meetings, and not just letting our director plan those agendas, but have the learning team work to collaborate to make the agendas meaningful and purposeful and deliberate together with those things in it, and the goal of becoming, PBL masters. Because I mean, that's, as facilitators, our learning objective is to do PBL well and do it awesome and consistent throughout the school.
And our original plan was, it was like top down kind of, and now we're focusing. So basically, currently our plan is for maintaining and retaining teachers at our site, and that would be embedded throughout each of our staff interactions. So as Jim mentioned, that includes our learning team looking to purposely collaborate meaningful and deliberate agendas for meeting times that'll help all teachers master best practices at the elementary level. So we're working on that.
So there's just something really important that they said in there, right? That's just right at the heart of what we've been doing for the last 2 days, right? Which is we took what was a teacher orientation process and made it the way we do our work all the time, right? That's what this is about. right? Making these things the way you go about your organizing your work all the time around learning, not just in the professional development time.
Right.
Right? That's right what we're after. Okay.
Yes, ma'am, Dr. Hayes.
I realize our technology policy stunk. We do have iPads and desktop for students, but we are so guarded when it comes to iPods and iPads and cell phones, and that's how students really get it. So, remapping time.
You thinking that first? And is it that the adults are guarded with it? Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Come get it, come get it. The mindset is changing.
Awesome. Good. Yes, sir.
We're taking on kind of a big can of worms, but we're a school within a school, and we do all of our PD and all of our staff meetings with the main campus, which is very relevant to us.
I think I know somebody you may want to talk to, but I'll
So we want to value our work, and we want it to be relevant. And we're sitting here with we happen to have an elementary school in our district that why don't we do our staff development in our meetings with them? Why not? It would be more relevant. We can knock out the necessary things, sexual harassment, whatever, Common Core. We can do that, but then we spend the rest of the time.
I know. We can lump those two together.
I love it. We can get past all of that.
That's pretty much what the staff meetings have been. And spend the rest of the time talking about learning.
Yeah.
It's going to cause a political shift, a huge political shift, but it's right. We're creating our own little network. Yeah, it makes sense. I'll get a good leadership.
I appreciate that.
We had another team over here that I get the privilege of working with on a regular basis that was talking about another big thing, right? So Liz, do you want to share it all? Yeah, sorry, I called on you. I was trying to pretend like I wasn't calling you, but I was calling on you. Yeah.
We're very different in that we are doing new tech in 2 small learning communities inside of a comprehensive high school. So we've got a few teachers who are doing it, and the rest of teachers do whatever they like to do. And so where we're battling right now is how to get these practices, how to empower those teachers who are doing really beautiful work and let it sprinkle throughout the system. And what we're battling is our department collaborations. I know you don't battle with those, but we're personally having issues with our department members coming together, and the focus of the conversations is content curriculum and not instructional practice. So that's what we're kind of challenged with, but yet we have these set-aside small learning communities established in the school for over 20 years as a really nice way for people to come together and talk about instruction, but how to make that shift and allow that to happen. So that's been kind of the project over here instead.
And the real question is, do we need to have them meet departments?
Hmm.
Or should
What's
we be,
the purpose there?
Yeah, what's the purpose of having
So that's
departments meet?
So talk about big cans of worms,
Right.
departmentalizing, right, getting people out of, right, but the point I want to make, the point I want to connect between the point Randy was making and the point Liz and Chad are making is that, right, when you start thinking in this way, you pretty quickly run into how many aspects of a school actually aren't organized around learning.
It's a subtraction.
Yeah. And even some of the things you thought were about learning actually aren't organized around learning, right? And so this is all about how do we figure out what those things are and re-engineer them. So it's not about a new initiative. It's about doing stuff you're already doing, but making it about learning.
Scott and I were talking about, as leaders, we haven't differentiated for our staff. And so in essence, we say, what do we want to work on? And this year our staff said we want to get to deeper learning by design and facilitation. And we thought it was a consensus model. So we said, okay, so let's do this by observing each other, and I'm buying stuff so that we can go do it and not getting a foothold. And then we realized they were we got consensus because they're all really good sports and they trust us, but it wasn't their personal learning passion, or they didn't go through any of this. They didn't identify the task, they didn't figure out what their tactic was or their strategy. They were like, okay, we're all in this together, and they were all into not learning anything at all together. And so we're in this. They like each other a lot. So I think it was a really important lesson for us is that, you know, we can identify maybe the task for them of you want to get better at deeper learning. What does that mean? What's success for you? For you, it might be differentiation, and for you, it might be questioning. For you, it might be just like classroom management. So then how do we create conditions to support that instead of us identifying all 3 steps and then saying, okay, what'd you learn? Take away. I mean, that's our big takeaway, I think, today.
Yes, ma'am.
Where we are in our process is how do we embed critique, revision, and reflection now as part of our culture. And so what we are taking away is kind of coming up with a master plan, but within that having our facilitators take ownership of the whole process. So, you know, setting it up to where we can have work on different mindsets, and then how does that going to impact and assist our learners? And then moving into creating space for agency work, very much kind of like the presentation I went to yesterday where the students are taking ownership and giving up, you know, doing some of these advisory lessons, but not our advisory lessons necessarily, more like during our adult learning when they have the PBL prep time where the learners are all together, where students, learners can actually take the initiative and ownership over working through the agency rubric and providing lessons within that. And then moving into making sure we're using our cognitive process to work on creating that kind of culture where we're looking at a project and coming up with an NTO protocol or process on how we critique projects. Because our facilitators might not know how to do that, and our students might not know how to critique other learners' work, and so to make sure that we create a protocol and NTO process that gives them structure in which they can look at projects and take it to the next level. That's the big plan. I don't know what we'll do in 6 months.
Awesome. You don't mind taking on the work? Awesome. Yeah. So thank you all so very much for sharing out where you are in this process and how you're thinking through this process. What we want to be sure to share with you is that this process is mobile. You don't necessarily have to just stick with teachers. You can take a current policy around your students. You can apply it to other policies. You can continue to go through this process and dig deeply in other processes and structures and policies that you want to unpack, not only just as a leadership team, but also with your staff. So we want to give you this opportunity to first, you can continue to keep designing this and unpacking this current policy from the perspective of supporting your faculty and your facilitators, or you can shift to thinking through a current policy around students. Okay. And start to unpack take the same policy through the lens of the student, possibly. Okay. So just want to give you that option. You can continue to work. You're flowing. You got it. You're making it happen. Continue to flow with what you have, or you can shift and select the student level policy to think through.
Starla, can I add one thing there?
Okay. Yes.
If you shift to a student thing,
yes,
right? Remember, go back to the start of the process.
Right.
Right. That process is designed to help you get through there. So we really want you to think about that process as a tool you're leaving with. Okay. We're going to take, so one, they're putting out beverages and a snack for you.
Yes.
We're going to take a quick break while they finish sort of tearing on this wall, and then we'll have actually a quick closing as an entire group before we, and that'll be sort of our formal end before we have the breakout sessions before lunch. Okay?
I agree.
So
I agree.
this is, you're welcome to keep working while they're sorting out the room, but it's also break time for you, and at 10:15 we'll start our closing section for the
Correct.
anchor session.
Okay.
In here, yeah, and it's all here. Yep.